Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is John Domas, and I'm the director of the Michigan Chemistry Council. Welcome to this morning's program, Developing and Implementing Sustainability Strategies That Matter. As our industry and others continue along our sustainability journeys, we've realized that there's tremendous diversity of examples about how organizations are developing and implementing their own sustainability strategies or supporting others in that space. And there is so much that can be talked about and learned. Here in Michigan, agriculture and manufacturing are two of our largest economic sectors, and sustainability goals cannot be achieved in a silo. Farming pun intended, of course. So today we are really looking forward to hearing from our three presenters from the Nature Conservancy, from Corteva Agriscience, and from Nexus Engineering Group, all of which have perspectives on sustainability in the manufacturing as well as agricultural spaces. And as an initial housekeeping matter, to remind everyone, our attendees' lines are all muted, but we hope to address some questions and concluding remarks at the end. And so we encourage you to submit your questions using the chat or Q&A features. This session is being recorded, and we will make it available afterwards for you to review, as well as the materials. So first question out of the way, yes, you will receive a copy of the slides, and you may distribute that within your organizations or to other interested parties. So we will be hearing first from our first presenter, who is Mary Fales. She is a soil health and nutrient strategy lead at the Nature Conservancy in Michigan, followed by Ashish Batra, who is the senior director for global regulatory affairs and R&D sustainability for Corteva Agriscience. Finally, Aaron Beekler, who is the senior project leader for Nexus Engineering Group based in Midland, Michigan. So with that, I will turn it over to Mary. Thanks again, and we will be hearing from our presenters and seeing from them as we go. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks, John, so much for inviting the Nature Conservancy to this discussion today. Like you said, I am part of the Midwest Division, and that means that I serve 5 Great Lakes states, including Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. And I work with teams of staff in each one of those states on their agricultural conservation programs. And I just want to note for the rest of my presentation that if I say TNC, I'm talking about the Nature Conservancy. So I might fall back into using that acronym. And I also want to pre-apologize. I have 2 large dogs in the room with me, and we have somebody working on the outside of our house. So from time to time, you might hear them bark, but I'm going to hope to keep that to a minimum. And if you can go to the next slide, John. I want to start out with just explaining a little bit about who the Nature Conservancy is. I'm going to guess that not a lot of you are familiar with the Nature Conservancy, and I'm not going to take that personally. That's probably for good reason, and I'll explain a little bit about that in my next couple of slides. But our mission is to conserve the lands on which all life depends, and that's really an important mission for us because there's people in that mission. And if you were into the internal workings of the Nature Conservancy, you would understand how important the people are in every project that we do. We don't do our projects just for nature. The people are very important to our strategies as well. Next slide. We are the largest land environmental NGO in the world, and you can see that we have over 1 million members, and we work in 79 countries globally. So we really pride ourselves on being science-based, collaborative, and nonpartisan. Many people really haven't heard of us because we tend to work behind the scenes. We aren't often out there bringing lawsuits or protesting companies or events because we typically don't think that that's a really good way to bring solutions, and we're very solutions focused. Next slide. Our impact in Michigan is really about the people. We have 55 staff and over 25 trustees, and we do, as a land conservancy, we do have preserves, but we're very focused on forests, coasts, waters, and climate action. And if you can go to the next slide, being focused on those 4 areas allows us to do a lot of work in addition to protecting lands. We also work in sustainable fisheries. We work on climate adaptation and mitigation, so we do a lot of work in forests. I mentioned climate before, so that means that we work in policy. We have a healthy cities program, and then I'm just ending with the soil health and water quality. That's where I spend all of my time, and I'll be offering some examples from agricultural conservation later in my presentation. And if you can go to the next slide. I didn't want to spend a lot of slides belaboring the point that climate change and biodiversity crises are compounding one another. And along with a myriad of other kind of mini crises like loss of wetlands, extreme soil degradation and erosion, and algal blooms. So the earth is really facing major challenges. And I think that sustainability is kind of a foundational concept that can help us address these major challenges. So there's a lot of definitions of sustainability out there. The one that I really gravitate towards the most is that sustainability means meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I think maybe I gravitate towards that because I have 3 children of my own, and I think of, all the generations to come. So sustainability does have 3 principles: social, economic, and environmental. And I think what we need to do as a society is learn to balance this 3-legged stool. If you go to the next slide, when I think of sustainability, I tend to think of this, you can go back one. Yeah, the race to net zero. And this can be really taken in terms of countries as well as companies. When carbon dioxide emissions reach net zero, the global temperatures will stabilize according to the International Panel on Climate Change. So for 1.5 degrees Celsius, this means achieving net zero emissions globally in the 2050s. If you're talking about a 2 degrees Celsius, the net zero would be reached in the early 2070s. So you can see that a couple of countries down there on the left have achieved net zeros, and then there's a handful of other companies that have more near-term goals. But most of the countries around the world are in this 2050 goal range, with a couple of laggards, I guess I would call them, at the end that have goals in the 2070s or even beyond. And if you want to inspect this graphic even closer, I would just suggest going to Visual Capitalist. I love this website. It puts a lot of complicated topics into visual form, and just Google net zero once you get to Visual Capitalist. So you can see like what are the mechanisms that will get us to net zero. And if you click on the next slide, net zero, this net zero idea also applies to companies. You can see that every day there are companies that are kind of joining this net zero initiative, whether that's becoming carbon neutral or going for 100% renewables as an energy source. Right now on this graphic, there's 163 companies represented. I think it's a little bit dated, so there's probably many more companies that we could add to this graphic. And if I zoom in here on the left lower side of this graphic, you can see a lot of companies that we're familiar with, from Starbucks to Lowe's to Nike to Walmart, Target, Coca-Cola, Pepsi Company. And depending on what these companies do, they may need to implement different kinds of sustainability programs. If those companies deal with commodities in any way, or they depend on growing food in their line of business, that's where they might intersect with our line of work in conservation agriculture. And you can hit the next slide. So really quickly, I wanted to show what our strategy is for agricultural conservation, or regenerative crop systems, as we call it. We have a pretty large goal overall of achieving regenerative cropping systems on 50% of row crop acres in the US by 2030. So if you just look at those 5 states that I serve around the Great Lakes, that's 27 million acres is our goal. And that's pretty huge. That sometimes keeps me up at night. And on this graphic, I'll just have you key in on 2 things. One is the left-hand side under key strategies. These are kind of how we bucket out our work and how we think we're going to get to that major goal. One is by keying in on farmer advisors. We think farmer advisors are really important to bringing the conservation message to farmers because they're so trusted in farmers' decision-making. The next one is corporate sustainability. And I've already talked about this a little bit already, and I'll talk about it a little bit more when I get to the examples. Innovation would be the 3rd bucket, and that's bringing advancements in technology to how farmers would implement conservation on the farm. The 4th one would be public policy, and public policy is very important no matter what year you're talking about, but it's especially important in years like 2023, where we're going to have a new farm bill introduced in Congress. And then last but not least, farmers leading change. And this is where we do anything we can do to support farmers learning from other farmers. So in all the surveys that we've ever seen, farmers rate other farmers as one of their top most trusted sources of information. So if we can get those farmers that are already doing conservation to talk to other farmers, we consider that a win. The other place that I'll direct your attention to on this graphic is the bottom right corner where it says outcomes. You can see that we have a couple of environmental outcomes listed here: improved water quality and reduced greenhouse gases that will come from implementing these strategies. But none of these strategies can win, or they won't win, unless these practices or these programs or these key strategies can also bring improved profitability and resilience to the farm and to these farming communities. And you can go ahead and click to the next slide. I wanted to just address, like, what kinds of practices are we talking about in a regenerative cropping system? And I could probably do a whole presentation on just these alone, but just to keep it really basic, we're talking about things like cover crops. So a crop that you would plant after your main commodity crop is harvested, and that's really to just improve soil health. Crop rotations, keeping our crop rotations very diverse. We don't necessarily have a huge problem with this in Michigan because we already have very diverse cropping systems. Reducing tillage is a big one. So we like to get away from conventional tillage and get towards things like strip tillage and no-till. And then last but not least, nutrient management. So following the 4 R's of nutrient management and getting very precise about how we apply nutrients. And that involves putting the nutrients in the right place, at the right time of year, using the right source of nutrients, and applying them at the right rate. You could also throw in things here like integrating livestock back into the operation, edge of field practices that deal with water management, and even maybe agroforestry. But these 4 are really the basics. And if you go to the next slide, I didn't want to get to the end of my talk and assume that everybody really understood the corn supply chain. So just to quickly show a graphic of all the many entities that are defined in the ag supply chain, I just wanted to highlight how our strategy fits in. So on the left-hand side, you have the inputs, and I've outlined in blue how the input side of the value chain intersects with our strategy. So I've got the equipment, seeds, crop protection, fertilizer, and independent agricultural retailers outlined. And that kind of fits into our farmer advisors side of our strategy. These entities are what I mean when I say farmer advisors. They're interacting with farmers frequently, very frequently throughout the year, and are advising them on key decisions on the farm. And then as you move through production and collection and storage, all the way to the right-hand side of this graphic, I've got some things outlined in red, and those really fall into our corporate sustainability side of things. So these are the trading organizations, food ingredients, processing, food retail, and restaurants. And that's where you'll likely see that these companies have sustainability goals. And if you click to the next slide, what kind of sustainability goals are we talking about? Typically, these organizations have goals around carbon and GHG reductions, sometimes water quality and water quantity, and a handful are even starting to dabble with biodiversity type goals. And so sometimes these companies, especially when they've got farmers in their line of work, they can come to organizations like the Nature Conservancy and want help in developing what type of goals they should be stating. Or sometimes if they already have goals, they'll come to somebody like the Nature Conservancy and want help in trying to meet these goals. So our opportunity is really in finding those partnerships that make sense for both the company and the Nature Conservancy. And if you click ahead, why are these companies really setting these goals? One of the reasons is they get big pressure from their investors on their ESG portfolio. And ESG is really around environment, social, and governance. So it's not a financial statement. It's more of a narrative around their sustainability goals and how various aspects of sustainability play into business risk and outcomes. I think decades ago, this used to be some kind of fluffy things that we didn't really pay attention to. But now this is really central to investing and companies paying attention to their ESG ratings to attract capital and to answer to shareholders. And so I'm just going to finish up with a couple of examples, and you can click to the next slide. Our agricultural conservation work in Michigan is really focused around Michigan's Saginaw Bay watershed. That's where we do a lot of our agricultural conservation work. It's Michigan's largest watershed. If you're not familiar with it, it takes up 15% of Michigan's land area, and it's got our highest concentration of prime farmland. So it's already a very diverse in its crop rotation. There's many different crops that are grown here. And if you can click to the next slide. There are two different projects I wanted. There's a multitude of different projects that are going on in Saginaw Bay, but there's two that I wanted to bring to your attention. And they really do, they are great examples of integrating with the supply chain. The first is called our Sustainable Wheat Project. And you can see that it's funded by HSBC Bank, but it's really a demonstration to consumer packaged goods company. That's what CPG means. In this case, we're really demonstrating to companies like Kellogg's, for example, how they can source sustainably grown wheat. And so the local partner is Star of the West Milling Company. And what the Nature Conservancy did was partner with Star of the West, and we put together a sustainability framework for local wheat growers. What kinds of practices could they bring on the farm to quote unquote sustainably grow wheat? And as long as these farmers follow these guidelines, what they can do is when they harvest their wheat and bring it to Star of the West Milling Company, they can actually get a bonus. We're calling them nature-based bonuses. And I think right now they're getting about 8 cents on the bushel if they follow this program. And so it's embedded entirely within, these payments are embedded entirely within the supply chain. They're not dependent on any government program. And it's really a great demonstration. There's of course environmental benefits, and there's these carbon emissions reductions that we've got listed here. But Star of the West is empowered then to go out and find more corporate partners that want to buy climate smart wheat for their ingredients for whatever brands or products they're developing. And so this is a real boost for Saginaw Bay wheat. The second example is called our Dairy Feed in Focus project. And this is a similar example, but it's in dairy. And we've got different partners. You can see the corporate partners listed at the bottom: Syngenta, Dairy Management Incorporated, Nestle, and then we've got some funding from the community through Rotary. And we're partnering with milk processors and buyers and farmers. And this one, what we're doing is asking them to implement practices that kind of tweak their dairy feed to reduce methane emissions. And again, it's got an environmental outcome, but it's also producing a climate smart milk. You could kind of look at this. And again, very attractive to our corporate partners, but has an environmental benefit as well. And that's like the best partnership you can have between a Nature Conservancy and a corporate partners, where both of our goals are being met. And then I'll just click to my last slide. The Nature Conservancy isn't a company like like other companies. We don't have ESG ratings. We don't have shareholders. But we do have very ambitious goals for 2030, and we have to answer to our trustees and to our donors and to our over 1 million members. And so I just wanted to end with this slide to show that every individual project that we do across states, across our 79 countries that we're invested in, are rolling up to our big, ambitious 2030 goals for climate, for oceans, for lands, for fresh water, and for people. And so I just wanted to kind of end with this to give some perspective that we do have kind of an overall plan for the impact that we want to have to save the planet. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm happy to stay on and answer questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Mary. Yeah, great content. And again, as we go to our next presenter, if any of our attendees would like to submit questions, please use the chat or Q&A features. So next we will hear from Ashish Batra with Corteva Agriscience. Take it away.
Thank you, John, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about sustainability at Corteva. So if you move to the next slide, here's a little bit of the outline of what I'm going to talk about, some of the factors driving our sustainability focus, a lot of which was already framed very nicely by Mary. We'll talk about the specific focus areas that we have within Corteva for sustainability, but I'm going to spend probably the bulk of my time talking about innovation, and particularly sustainable innovation, and how we can bring new technologies to our farmer growers that allow sustainability attributes to be delivered at the farm gate. And we're going to talk about the discovery process, how we discover our new molecules, how we scale up those molecules and manufacturing assets, how we deliver those sustainable innovations in an actual product format, and how sustainability criteria are being embedded sort of end to end in this 10-year journey, 10 to 12-year journey that it takes from discovering a new molecule all the way to delivering it to our farmer customers. So when we move to the next slide, it's really a pivotal time for agriculture. Global food demand continues to grow. We anticipate the population to hit roughly 10 billion people by 2050. Because of climate change, farmers have more threats to their crops. According to certain surveys, more than 50% of the countries in the world have had a change or a drop in productivity because of either severe weather events or drought events. And society continues to expect more from agriculture. Folks want to understand all the inputs that are going into the food that they are consuming. So with that backdrop, what we believe on the next slide is that farmers are actually the most important stewards of our land and natural resources. We also believe that agriculture has the power to transform the environmental, economic, and societal health of our planet, sort of reflecting also on what Mary was talking about from a sustainability definition perspective. And then agriculture technologies can really help farmers produce more food while reducing the environmental impact, creating more land use choices for our farmers and communities. So from that perspective, we have come up with sort of these 4 focus areas that you'll see on the next slide. And these are really around sustainable innovation, innovative products that increase the productivity and profitability potential while offering climate solutions and improving the resilience to mounting weed, insect disease, and weather pressures. Greenhouse gas emissions, so science-based action to address climate change, and ensuring that we are taking steps within our own operations to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Biodiversity, really ensuring that efforts are underway to reduce the impacts through agronomic best practices, investments in future land use change in sensitive areas to ensure that balance, that very fine ecological balance, continues to be maintained for future generations. And then lastly, inclusion, diversity, and equity. We firmly believe that food security is something that impacts every human being on the planet, and we have to look at agriculture from the lens of inclusion, diversity, and equity in order to be able to deliver food security for one and all. So as I mentioned, I'm going to focus most of my talk today on sustainable innovation. And from that perspective, on the next slide, you'll see our commitment, which is that every newly developed Corteva solution from our pipeline will meet our sustainability criteria by 2025. So 100% of the innovations that we bring forward would meet these sustainability criteria. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that we already have a very rich history of bringing forward sustainable solutions. Corteva has won 6 green chemistry challenge awards from the US EPA, more than any other agricultural input company in the world. These include products like Corteva and Gemvelva. Both are actives that are produced here in Michigan, Midland, as well as Harbor Beach. And if you're interested in kind of learning the very powerful, rich histories of how these molecules were discovered and launched, I'd encourage you to click on those YouTube video links that are in the presentation that you'll receive that tell the fascinating stories of Corteva and Gemvelva produced right here in Michigan. So building upon that very rich history that we've had over the last several decades, when we think about our sustainability criteria on the next slide, and John, if you can go to the next slide, these are the 12 sustainability criteria by which we evaluate all of our crop protection products now. And these are really built upon the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So there are 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals that were brought forward in 2015. Of these, 5 that align to zero hunger, clean water and sanitation, responsible consumption and production, climate action, and life on land are the ones that we believe as an ag tech company we can help influence the most. And then specifically to drill down into criteria, for example, improving resilience of ag production. What does that mean for a bench scientist? What does that mean for a scientist that is trying to discover the next new molecule that would offer resilience of ag production? It translates to developing novel or underutilized modes of action in a target market. As chemistries get used and sometimes overused, resistance develops. And therefore, in order to improve the resilience of agriculture production, you want to ensure that the modes of action that we are bringing forward are novel or underutilized. Likewise, if we look at a criteria such as reducing waste and improving product application efficiencies, we've set criteria that use rates in target crops are less than 100 grams AI per hectare. If you think about legacy old chemistries that were brought forward 10, 15, 20 years ago, they would have kilograms or sometimes tens of kilograms of usage per hectare, whereas these are much more ambitious benchmarks that we have set forward for our new innovations to be able to meet, such that not only is the handprint in the environment being minimized, but also the footprint in our manufacturing assets of how much you have to actually produce is being minimized, and as a consequence, that has an impact also on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so I'm not going to go through the details of every one of these criteria, but suffice to say there are very objective, specific criteria that have to be met in order for an innovation to qualify as a sustainable innovation. But there are some basic non-negotiables around human health, baseline requirements that every single product has to meet in order to be able to qualify as a sustainable innovation. So when we think about, as we go to the next slide, John, the new products that we have come out over the last 5 to 7 years, and we put them through this lens of the sustainable innovation criteria that I just talked about. Roughly 89% of our new crop protection active ingredients delivered a notable sustainable advantage. So we are well on our way to getting to that goal that has been set to get to 100% by 2025. You can see a wide variety of products here, from insecticides to fungicides to herbicides that are all delivering on multiple aspects of the sustainable innovation criteria that I just mentioned on that sustainability wheel. So if we move to the next slide, how do we ensure that we have sustainable outcomes and sustainable innovation? So when we think about the journey from discovery through launching a new product, it roughly takes $300 million or so to discover a brand new active ingredient and bring it to the marketplace. And it's a 10 to 11-year journey. So you have to be thinking about it at every single stage. It cannot be an afterthought. It has to be embedded at every stage gate. It has to be at the very conception of the idea to how it progresses through our pipeline. And that is sort of what we do. We embed sustainability at every stage and every area of product development. We use predictive tools. We use a lot of new cutting edge technologies. We have stage gate relevant metrics and criteria at which you evaluate whether the product is meeting the sustainability criteria or not. And if they're not, they get actively reworked or in some cases dephased out of the pipeline so that they do not move forward in our pipeline. So on the next slide, what you'll see is the change in paradigm that has occurred. So over the years in the discovery organization, we have had a change from a mentality of just being focused on efficacy to being efficacy and sustainability focused. So previously, our discovery chemists would spend most of their time trying to identify that unique molecule that would provide the biological activity against the desired pest, the desired disease, or the specific weed species. But over the course of the last several years, the focus has turned more and more to looking at not just the efficacy attributes, but all of the sustainability attributes that you can design for in a molecule, such that a lower molecular weight, such that it degrades much more rapidly in the environment. It has attributes that are friendlier to pollinators. So all of this effort is really driven through a lot of computational tools. If you think about the number of permutation combinations of chemistries that we can be discovering, it is of the order of 10 to the power 69. That is more than the number of stars and galaxies in the known universe. So you might think this is like finding a needle in the haystack, but we use very fundamental scientific hypotheses, a lot of computational tools to really identify the molecules that help not only meet the purposes from a field efficacy perspective, but also our sustainability attributes. So on the next slide, you'll see sort of the different approaches that we have taken to discovering new molecules at Corteva. The first and foremost that we rely extensively on is natural products. We are the industry leader in natural products. I gave you a couple examples of what are already produced in Michigan, Gemvelva and Calcova, that are natural, that are products that are, Calcova is completely natural, and then Gemvelva is one synthetic modification of a natural product. We use bioactive hypotheses, so we understand what could have potential bioactivity. And then occasionally we'll also use competition-inspired approaches to sort of screen through thousands and thousands of compounds and get that one unique hit where you have reproducible biological activity. That then we will start to look at spectrum, we'll start to look at mode of action, then we start to look at formulations, look at the processing of these molecules to eventually becoming a product. And we are embedding sustainability attributes into all of these stages. And it's a very iterative cycle. This is kind of what we refer to as the design, build, test approach to designing those analogs. We often say that molecules are not just discovered, they are designed for, because you are specifically embedding those sustainability attributes. So then if you go to the next slide, so now that you have sort of discovered that molecule, you need to be able to scale up into a manufacturing process. And that's where we start to look at the 12 principles of green chemistry and engineering. We've started to use a lot of biocatalysis. So rather than using precious metal catalysts, we use biocatalysis that allow us to build chiral molecules in moderately few steps. We've started to look at innovative process development. So rather than do everything in batch synthesis, can we be using continuous flow technologies, which are asset life, that have improved safety, and also reduce the amount of energy consumption and waste generation in a manufacturing setting. Again, a lot of use of computational synthesis tools that allow us to discover the best routes that have the least waste profiles. That is getting to be used extensively, and using a lot of high throughput experimentation that allows us to access a lot of the process conditions that we may not have been able to access previously because of the way batch chemistries would be set up, whereas with high throughput experimentation, we're able to identify those unique process conditions that minimize waste, that improve the yields, and overall have the least environmental impact. So going from the manufacturing setting to say, okay, we've discovered the active ingredient, we've scaled it up, but what actually gets delivered to the farmer customer is an actual formulated product. And that's where on the next slide, you'll see the different approaches that are taken in our formulation process research, formulation product research, where we look at all of the ingredients that are the non-active ingredients that go in making a formulation to be shelf stable, to be applied with ease by our farmer customers, to stay on point and have a low drift, have sustainable packaging, and have, again, an ability to minimize the amount of product that you have to put out into the field. All of those criteria then get used with the advent of drone technology and the ability to have very targeted spray applications. A lot of effort now is also being put in discovering and designing formulations that can be applied seamlessly through drones, which means, again, you have a very concentrated formulation that minimizes the amount of water that you have to use, but also on point, on target. We have digital insights that can, again, drive to optimal use, such that on the map here, you see kind of, instead of broadcast applications spraying across the entire field, treating only the red areas because of the digital insights that you're able to get. That's another way to impact the environmental handprint that we have of our products. So, and then finally, it's sort of all on the next slide, it comes together. So I talked about the active discovery, the scale up, the formulation. So this is just an example of one of the actives and formulated products that won the US EPA Green Chemistry Award in 2018. It's a novel broad spectrum post-emergent weed control solution. From a sustainability benefit standpoint, extremely low use rates as compared to the legacy old products that might have been applied at 3.5 to 7 kilograms per hectare. This product gets applied at 10 to 30 grams AI per hectare. So that's the equivalent of what you might have in your sugar sachet. It has a best-in-class regulatory profile. It's exempted from tolerances because of its extreme favorable environmental and tox profiles. It is a designated reduced risk pesticide in rice and aquatics. And even from a formulation perspective, it has a very high proportion of green solvents. And the low use rate concept that I introduced, it not only from a, as I mentioned, from a handprint perspective, but also from a greenhouse gas avoided emissions perspective is a great benefit. So when we think about previously having to produce thousands of metric tons of product with the older chemistries, with products like Rinskor, because at maturity, the amount of volume of product that you have to produce, the avoided CO2 emissions are again in billions of kilograms of CO2 equivalents, and an environmental load that's again reduced by hundreds of millions of kgs. So that's hopefully giving you the perspective of how the paradigm has shifted on bringing forward sustainable innovations all the way from discovery through process scale up through our final formulated products. And on the next slide, maybe I'll just leave you with some additional work that's going on in meeting our other sustainability goals, particularly greenhouse gas emissions. So this is very much focused on reducing our GHG footprint within our own operations. And on the next slide, this is very much focused from a science-based perspective. We are taking some very interesting innovative approaches to create a path for lasting emission reductions that can be sustained over time. These include, but are not limited to, evaluating energy reduction initiatives within our manufacturing assets, focusing our R&D efforts, as I indicated, in improving the production efficiencies, and also the options to transition to renewable energy sources. So on the last slide, I'll sort of summarize with some key takeaways. As I mentioned, we've been committed to sustainability for many years with a very strong track record of delivering products with sustainable attributes. We've had a paradigm shift occur to embed sustainability attributes from the earliest stages of our pipeline and discovery and product development efforts. and it's being embedded in all new products and solution concepts from inception through development and launch. And as I indicated, roughly 90% of our new products, as well as our pipeline, meets our sustainable innovation criteria. And we are well on our way to meeting our goal of getting 100% of our pipeline being sustainably advantaged by 2025. So thank you for your attention today. Look forward to hearing any questions you have in the later half of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashish. Very interesting and very exciting work that's going on at Corteva. And much of that in Michigan too. Very proud. So our final presenter is going to be Aaron Beekler from the Nexus Engineering Group, who is going to discuss a little bit about engineering projects that his company and he's been involved with, and some examples for you. Take it away, Aaron. Aaron, I think you're on mute still, so why don't you start over?
All right. Yep. Thank you very much for inviting Nexus to this presentation. So you can go to the next slide. And so this is Nexus mission is to extend our clients' competitive advantage by delivering exceptional life cycle returns on project investments. So you can go to the next slide. So the history in Nexus, it was formed in 2005 by Jeff Herzog and Marianne Carrero. And they both started at BP doing refinery work. You can go to the next slide. So Nexus differentiators in what they really focus on is they have a lot of experience with owner side experience. So a lot of the employees have actually worked for folks like Corteva and different industrial companies and chemical companies on the call today. They're relationship oriented, predictable, trying to deliver projects on time and on budget, and they strive to deliver every job efficiently. And they do this with world-class teams on the projects and the right teams on the projects. You can go to the next slide. So this is a slide just kind of highlighting what industries that Nexus serves has projects in, and it's energy, renewables, chemicals, petroleum, fuel refining, and manufacturing. So a very broad portfolio of companies that they've worked with and industries they've worked in. All right, you can go to the next slide. And this is just an example of customers, so primary customers. And one thing to highlight here is Nexus has a strategic partnership with 80% of their customer base. So they're very driven to be partners, similar to what the Nature Conservancy, what Mary was talking about with the Nature Conservancy. So that helps to be able to deliver good projects on time and with having that partnership, because we get to know the customers. All right, you can go to the next slide. And this right here is a staff mix. So as you can see, a pretty broad portfolio of resources that Nexus has. So we would call ourselves a full service engineering firm in the industrial sector. So you can see process all the way from process engineers all the way to construction specialists that puts the team together to execute a project efficiently and at low cost. So you can go to the next slide. This is an example of some energy services that we provide. So this is kind of getting into the sustainability side, greenhouse gas emission, that kind of stuff. So a lot of biogas, biomass, capacity planning. It just gives some examples of what we get into to kind of highlight the broad portfolio of projects that Nexus has been involved in. And trying to helping customers drive to net zero carbon, sustainable investments, and helping to vet those investments out. And kind of like Ashish had mentioned, going through the gate review process and trying to get the correct projects executed so that the company can invest as smartly as possible. Next slide, please. And Nexus also has a lot of experience in the renewable side, green energy, power integration for renewable resources, doing return on investment analysis, implementation of smart solutions, renewable integration, and they get into stuff like hydrogen, waste to energy, and you'll see a couple examples as we move forward here. So you can go to the next slide. So this is an example of a project that Nexus is actually currently working on, and it's for a company called Montauk Renewables, and this is the waste to energy. So they're taking actually hog waste, processing it and making it into energy, and it's at large scale. It's like 15 ton of waste a day. And so you can go to the next slide here. That's just, people can read through that when they get the information. So the waste to energy project, and this is kind of ESG impacts, environmental, social impacts, positive environmental impact through water quality, greenhouse gas reduction, and out as byproducts of this, you can actually get organic soil amendments and fertilizers that come from this. So, this project actually, it takes hog manure and it processes it in I would say a better, a more responsible way than just putting it on the field. And kind of the 4 R's that Mary had mentioned in her presentation, which helps with the water quality, and that's one of the big drivers for this hog waste energy in North Carolina. So the social aspect of things helps create a circular economy. So you're taking hog waste that has come from livestock and making it into energy, and it just kind of completes the whole circle. And then with that, a lot of that drives local economic benefits, because it brings things, a lot of this stuff can only be done locally, as opposed to, to reduce transportation costs and such. So kind of an interesting project that, Nexus has been involved in right from inception of the project with Montauk. Next slide, please. This is another example in a different venue, and this is kind of the energy side. So they call it combined heat and power, which is just a different way of producing power in a more economical sense, and reducing greenhouse gas and being more energy efficient. So, and this is also an industrial scale, 15 megawatt, which is pretty large. So you can go to the next slide. And this is kind of the environment, some environmental impacts, right? Energy conservation, greenhouse gas reduction, and it really focuses on how do you help a company, and this is potentially where something could go for greenhouse gas reductions for somebody like a Corteva and many other customers that are on this call. So next slide, please. So this is just kind of highlighting the different things that Nexus, the thought process Nexus goes through when they get with a client, and to understand what they're looking for, how they can best suit the needs and come up with the best solution. So we look at cost and risk, economics, we look at the plant, the energy, the resources. Also look at the plant, can we optimize operability, reliability, and then also pull in the kind of the sustainability side of things. Are there renewable options? What can we do for environmental, social governance to help with goals that the client has? Are there different credits out there? The big thing here is looking at projects, trying to ask the right questions, be proactive on projects to get the best return on investment for a customer, and making the right decision for going with the best project for the customer. And something that's rooted in the Nexus thought process is always an awareness of sustainability, and that being an essential part of a project. You can go to the next slide. So this is just questions. I'll be around for any questions, which I think is next up on the docket, and that's my contact information if you have any further questions after the call today. So thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate the invite, John.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate everybody for the content, and I want to bring back our presenters here, and we will take a few questions. We will try to be brief with it and succinct to address any topics. If anyone has any, please be sure to submit them into the chat or the Q&A function. But I'll start with Mary, who was our first presenter, and just ask generally of what kind of interest or opportunities have you seen? You touched a little bit on it with some of the agricultural supply chain, but just in general for manufacturers and others to help engage in the work with the Nature Conservancy.
What kind of interest have I seen? We have such a wide variety. I'm thinking back to one of the first slides I showed of all the different areas that we're engaged in, from forests to healthy cities to mitigating and adapting to climate change and climate policy. I think there's a myriad of ways to partner with the Nature Conservancy. So, I can't think of specific manufacturing that we partnered with, except maybe around renewables. We do have a very robust site renewables right strategy, and we're kind of looking at how can we build that out across the Midwest. And we have tools and processes to help us do that, and avoiding the last great places and where we have impacts with wildlife and birds. So I think there's an opportunity there for manufacturing to help us look at that site renewables right strategy and build that out across the Midwest.
Great, I appreciate it. And we'll provide contact information for the presenters and their organizations. Definitely check out TNC. They do a lot of great work. And Ashish, I will just kind of a general question. You touched a little bit on this, but I think it's interesting to consider that while your company's products and operations are by no means new, Corteva as a company is pretty new, having just come into being less than 4 years ago. And so can you talk about how the company has gone about developing the sustainability strategy that kind of reflects what the company is all about, as well as aligning that strategy between the different stakeholders, including, your farming customers, governmental bodies, investors, all of which have maybe their own unique perspective on what that should mean?
No, absolutely, John. And as you rightly pointed out, we're a fairly new company with a rich 100-year plus history. And the sustainability focus areas often come about through what are referred to as materiality assessments. Every company that looks at developing their ESG priorities goes through that. And certainly, as we thought about our sustainability objectives, a lot of consultation with investors, farmer growers, with a lot of our food value chain, all of that was taken into account. And that's how we came up with sort of our initial set of sustainability objectives that were communicated in our 2020 sustainability report. But then we also recognized over time that we needed to become extremely focused in specific areas that have probably the biggest impact. So that's where we revised our focus areas last year down to the 4 that I pointed out around sustainable innovation, biodiversity, greenhouse gas emission reduction, and ID&E. So those focused areas are now 4 very concise that have very good alignment across the organization as to which sub-functions really drive it, rather than it being the accountability of a sort of a separate corporate sustainability function. They are very much embedded in the way we do work. So, so it's been an evolution. We started off with, I would say, roughly 14 odd goals, and then they have been further refined to be very focused and very purposeful over the course of these last 4 years, the ones that I described today.
Great. And it's great to see the company being such a leader in this space and being active in this area. This could be a question for either Mary or Ashish, maybe. I think Mary talked about just the awareness within the customer base, the supply chains, about the sustainability impacts of industries, supply chains, even products down to that level, and an opportunity then for producers and companies and businesses to validate positive sustainability outcomes and to help that to drive business opportunities. And so maybe you could talk about just that general lesson and where you think that trend is going, either Mary or Ashish, and alternately, if we don't address these issues in Michigan, for example, with issues like the Saginaw Bay or Lake Erie watersheds, do you think that could be a challenge then for business that our products and our value is diminished?
I'll just offer just a couple of comments. One is, I think that there is a huge opportunity for products right now that address and integrate sustainability. There's a huge push for quote unquote climate smart products right now through USDA, and I think that farmers have the opportunity right now to capitalize on this. And if we don't address it, you're looking at the Saginaw Bay could possibly go the direction of Western Lake Erie Basin, where we have really significant algal blooms and impacts to drinking water. And I'll let Ashish comment now.
Yeah, and I think, it kind of goes back to one of the comments I'd made during the presentation, that we believe that farmers are the best stewards of the land, right? They want to pass their operations on from generation to generation. So they are very much interested in adopting the new technologies that allow them to continue to have viable, sustainable operations generation after generation. So in that regard, when you think about the value chain asking for products that have minimized the environmental impact, there is a pull not only from, say, the food companies further downstream, and then them advocating for certain environmental impacts, for example, that certain products may be having, and for encouraging farmers not to be using those kinds of products, which brings forward a pull for more sustainable products. So it is, when you look at the entire value chain that needs to be sort of brought to bear to bring the most benefit for the planet, it really, all parties need to be working together.
Yeah, I think we would all agree that ESG presents risks for companies as well as opportunities, and it's something we have to be very serious and intentional about and forward-looking. And I think every company, depending on their business and operations, is going to be looking at the various specifics there. Aaron, I want to ask you, just over your career as an engineer, how you've seen maybe sustainability goals impacting the types of projects or business case for certain projects that we wouldn't have seen before, and where do you see that going?
I mean, over my career, I guess I've seen where it really comes down to the focus on looking at energy conservation and different aspects of, you can track a lot of that back to greenhouse gas type stuff, but there's been a lot more focus on a lot of these aspects of things in projects. And I think I'm seeing where teams are looking at that a lot more, and I guess maybe kind of demanding that look, or people look at it with those glasses on when you're doing projects. I mean, it's stuff as simple as now, whenever you go in and replace like a chiller unit or an HVAC unit, you're looking at what types of refrigerant is used, and is it climate friendly, climate smart, so that it's kind of funny, this climate smart approach is very true. So yeah, I see it happening more and more on projects, and it's really, how do you integrate it? Because really, capital projects are the place to integrate most of these things. I mean, it's the best bang for your buck because you're already doing it. So how do you do it? I always say, how do you do it smarter and better?
Yeah, absolutely. That race to net zero that I think Mary started us off with is going to be a big challenge, touching many things and demanding, some serious investment and work. So with that, that's our time for today. If there's any further questions, the registrants and attendees can feel free to follow up with myself. I can pass them along, and we'll be in touch, as I promised, with the recording, with the slides. I want to just give, again, a great thank you to our presenters for their time this morning, for their expertise and all the work that they're doing. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Bye.